because speaking of like the ecology of a place, and we speak a lot about place-based wisdom and how that culture and that community knows what they need, and how academia and medicine need to be humble enough to step back and ask this community what they need because they know best.
Mindbend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mindbend Creative.
How you doing? Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
You flew down from Vancouver.
I did.
On Halloween night, late at Halloween night, on your broom.
Night.
Direct flight.
Midnight.
Yeah.
Yep.
Landed at midnight.
Yep. Yep.
And what the heck brought you to Los Angeles?
A big privilege. I got to host a symposium at UCLA.
Congratulations.
They're developing a new initiative, ecological medicine and psychedelic studies, which is the heart of what I want to do.
This is brand new.
It's brand new. It doesn't exist yet. So this symposium and one previous one was bringing together speakers and bringing together thought leaders, multidisciplinary, super multidisciplinary, which is really fun, around ecology and green design spaces and animal relationships and nature rights activists and indigenous wisdom and understanding the relationships with nature and how those can be improved, and health and psychedelic folks, which is sort of my area of study and experiences with psychedelic psychiatry. I've been shortening it too, even though I don't think that term is really necessarily.
Do you call yourself a psychedelic psychiatrist?
I mean, just as of like yesterday and today, I found it convenient. But there's a lot more than just psychedelics in my psychiatric practice. I think that it is one particular tool in the tool belt, but there are so many others. So I've always been interested in like complementary medicines to complement evidence-based medicine, to some degree alternative medicines as well, but particularly exercise, being in nature, and things that are just so obviously good for us that it's really, I kind of eye roll as I'm sitting in these conferences with these heavy-duty scientists speaking in all these research-oriented terms about the data that they've discovered, which is also amazing, like, with all due respect. But it's like studying the obvious. It's like needing to define the obvious. It's a bit like, oh, the fish are seeing the water, you know? And the fact that the powers that be need to hear that nature is good for us in these terms, which forces the scientists to have to study it in these ways, which are completely just insignificant measures of the depth of our connection with nature.
Well, tell me the name of the program again that's being developed.
It's called Ecological Medicine and Psychedelic Studies Initiative.
Ecological medicine, and this is it's not up yet, but it's being developed for offering, and they're hiring for the positions that will become available shortly.
They're not even there yet. Okay. They're just gathering the minds and the people and experts in various different disciplines, like that are involved with ecology in all types of ways. So ecology just meaning relationships, right?
Okay.
Like, so relationships between humans, animals, plants, being in right relationship with nature. And hopefully, and this is the idea of the psychedelics coming in, is that we will enhance our connectedness to nature, not just contact. But this idea of nature connectedness is really important because it's an emotional, conscious, visceral, like knowing that we are nature. We are part of nature. We are inseparable from it. It is us. We are it. We are interdependent. And that relationship really guides our happiness. So one of the statistics I love quoting is that nature connectedness is 4 times more powerful an indicator of happiness than socioeconomic status.
Break that down for me.
Nature connectedness is 4 times more powerful an indicator of our happiness than socioeconomic status.
You mean you can measure a person's happiness by the amount of exposure they have to nature more effectively than by measuring their economic?
No, the amount of connection somebody has with nature. So that like being in love with nature, basically, will that person will be 4 times happier than somebody who has a higher socioeconomic status.
How'd they figure that out?
I don't know. That's a good question. Surveys, I imagine.
Well, who would you have to survey to come to those numbers that hold up and get into papers and quotes?
I should know that because I invited Roz Watts, who's the author on some of these studies, as a part of my panel. But I didn't get into the methodological, the way that they actually examined that particular statistic, and I will look it up because it's a good question. But
Well,
I'm pretty sure it's survey based.
Nature and the relation. Now, ecology, you said, it clarified it for me because when you say ecology, I immediately think of the planet floating in
Yep.
space and the green and blue.
Yep.
But it's also relationships, interpersonal,
Yep.
and systemic or familial, whatever structures that
right.
people get into, right?
That's right.
So it's a consideration. This program is looking at the consideration of the person's ecosystem with the introduction of the psychedelic practice as well.
That's right.
Okay. And because I can ask you, because I know something about your historic relationship to nature and the programs that you've done in providing exposure
Yeah.
to the outdoors and to the natural elements. And I love to hear of that. I was excited to hear about when you first spoke about it. Would you revisit that a little bit for this conversation?
Yeah. So what we did, and this was back in 2007, the county started to develop. They had a new funding stream, and I was in the fortunate position to develop a wellness center. So this was an adjunct clinic to the regular county mental health system. And this problem of overpopulation was happening and overcrowding. And kind of once people are in the system as a mental health patient, you don't really graduate and get out. You know, so many of these meds, as we were talking about before, are like chronic, long-term use. People are afraid to come off of them because of various reasons, or recommend not coming off of them for various reasons. But there wasn't a sort of exit valve, if you will, and the systems were getting overcrowded. And so the development of these wellness centers allowed people who were doing pretty well to go into like what we'd consider a lower level of care. And that model was client run, which is really interesting because speaking of like the ecology of a place, and we speak a lot about place-based wisdom and how that culture and that community knows what they need, and how academia and medicine need to be humble enough to step back and ask this community what they need because they know best. And so that was part of that model, was sort of a for us by us model in South Central LA. Just, I mean, not technically, but to paint a picture, adjacent. Yeah, and one of the activities that the clients ran were these daily nature walks, and so we started going on patient-led walk. I mean, I was fortunate to get to lead them initially, but this is also part of the model, is that eventually the clients, I call them patients, I'm a physician, there's no disrespect in that, but patients would lead themselves and each other. And people started to get better, like significantly better, and wanted to go a little further. and wanted to do more. And so from there, we started going out into just using the resources that we had right there in the community, the city bus. And we would go on the city bus once a month to these more nature immersive experiences. Like we'd go to the beach, or we'd go up into the mountains, go on a proper hike. And again, people's experiences with nature were so profoundly healing. And at this time, I wasn't capturing research data, so this is all kind of experiential and anecdotal. But there was no doubt that these experiences in nature were helping my patients. So, from there, I started a company called Worldwide Wellness, and started working with folks that were kind of on the other extreme opposite end of the socioeconomic spectrum and really in trouble with addictions and kind of comorbid mental health and addiction issues. And we would go on more pronounced global wellness adventure travel experiences. So a full nature immersion. And we would do, it started out mostly surfing because these were the individuals that I was working with. They were surfers. We worked with that interest. And there's so much now that I'm learning about like the importance of what we were actually doing there. I knew it was helping. The patients knew it was helping. Their families knew that it was helping. But this initiative, just naming ecological medicine or just naming experiential therapy or, really discovering some of the folks that I was fortunate enough to meet this weekend, Sam Gandhi and such, are studying what about nature experiences, immersive experiences, really making us well. And it's this sense of awe. This sense of like...
It's a pattern disruptor, huh?
Yeah, it is. And that shift in perspective brings out a sense of small self. When you're seeing a grand vista or an ocean view to the horizon, or some migration of the wildebeests, or even truthfully, like very closely watching the migration of ants doing their thing and picking up leaves and passing them along and helping each other out. Just a real sense of being a part of something bigger than yourself, and this reverence and respect and connection with nature. And again, falling in love with nature. And what, is really exciting about that is studying how, psychedelics, first of all, do enhance that. But with or without psychedelics, like our relationship with nature is just so fundamental that...
With being without it, you're less healthy. Yeah. And it's easy to go without it for some people.
Yeah, and it's forced to be without it for some people who have been urbanized and who have been displaced, whether environmental disasters or whatever, and that will be increasingly so.
I think you had mentioned to me before that some of the population that you were originally working with in that 2007 experience had never been to the ocean before.
Correct.
And they lived in South Central.
That's right. 6 miles.
Yeah.
6 miles, right up the 90 freeway. Yeah.
Los Angeles is amazing for opportunities for nature exposure, if you have the means to do it, obviously. But when I moved here, I found the hiking, the ocean access, the desert, it's astonishing.
Yeah.
What do you think it is in your own relationship to nature? Is it awe still that continues to be healing for you?
Certainly healing. And, I don't know that I necessarily get that passively every day. I think...
Because you live in a natural part of the world.
I do. Yeah. I live in Vancouver, which is blessed to be supernatural.
Yeah.
British Columbia is like their tagline, and it's really very real, and it is awe-inspiring. But I think that even folks right here in LA, there are just countless accounts of nature awing people. And so it's everywhere. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. But it is everywhere. If we really take into account that every breath we breathe is an oxygen molecule put out by a tree, and every carbon dioxide we breathe out, a tree is, in reciprocal relationship with that and absorbing that and growing because of that. And that everything we put in our mouth, at some point, it may be altered dramatically, but at some point, everything that sustains us comes from the earth, from the soil, that our molecules are in constant exchange with the molecules of our environment. I think about like the microbiome we were talking about. We have 30 trillion cells in our body. And we have 40 trillion bacteria in our body. And so you are more bacteria than you are you. We are an ecosystem. And being in right relationship with our own ecosystem is health, whether that's individually, interpersonally, interspecies, including plants, fungi, waters, atmosphere, air. These are all part of our fabric. And I think when we can really see ourselves as nature, that the destruction of nature will be seen as self-destruction.
Give us some highlights from the symposium at UCLA.
Oh my God, there were so many.
Give us 3 that mean a lot to you in this moment.
I really am so grateful for the guests that I got to interview and moderate for on my panel, which was Psychedelics Informing Ecological Medicine. That was Bia Labate, who is the executive director of Chacruna. And Chacruna is an incredible organization focused on social justice and indigenous wisdom and reciprocity in the world of psychedelics. I'm on the board of directors for that organization, so I am absolutely biased. I do love it, and their work is incredible and pioneering, at least in this, sort of psychedelic quote unquote renaissance. I also got to interview Pam Crisco, who's a physician out of British Columbia and has a program called Roots to Thrive, who's actually working with like first-line healthcare workers, and various psychedelic substances, but namely ketamine. And that program's informed by ecological medicine and indigenous wisdom practices, with indigenous folks on the council, helping direct the programming. And her results are astonishing. 12 weeks with ketamine and 97% response rates to PTSD. So it's just and that speaks really to the power of community, which I am such a big believer in. And I don't want to misquote that 97%. It sounds so high to me but it's high. It might be 94.
Okay.
But it is impressive, and there's nothing like it in the world of psychopharmacology. Period. Nothing close. Joseph McCowan, who's been on clinical trials for MDMA for PTSD, on clinical trials for psilocybin and depression. He's one of the, just really an advocate and an educator for psychedelic assisted therapy. Super experienced. And Roz Watts was a dream to meet her. I've been following her work for ages. Like I said, she came up with just foundations of ecological medicine and psychedelic medicine, and some of the nature connectedness work and rating scales for nature connectedness, and so much more. A global online community for integration of psychedelics. And so this in and of itself was a huge highlight. But one takeaway that I'm just thinking of in the moment that popped into head is that Roz Watts said we need to be more tree. And in thinking about that and knowing, some of the work that's come out of UBC about the intelligence of trees, their ability to communicate with one another, their generosity and like giving away their carbon molecules on systems underground to even other species that need support, to be able to communicate with them, the dangers are coming. Just taking it slow, right? Just growth and loving the sunlight. I think trees have a phenomenal ability to trust that they're planted. They can't necessarily move, that everything that they need is within reach. Their soil, their nutrients, their sunshine, their rain, and they sit, and the roots grow, the branches grow, but for the most part, they're not mobile. And I see that as a real contrast to our potential as humans, is that we can move ourselves into environments that promote our own evolution. Like we can participate in our own evolution in ways that even these most intelligent, sentient teachers can't. So, be more tree was a really cool moment. There were many, but that's one.
Thank you for sharing that. It might be impossible to do this, but do you think you could distill maybe one or the primary difference that you're seeing in a container like the one you were part of this week at UCLA? A difference between the approach being taken to medicine for human beings in that container versus the status quo or kind of everything that's preceded it or existing predominantly?
Yeah. One of the things that they're doing is bringing nature, even visuals, into like post-operative surgical suites where people can't get out into nature, and showing that rates of healing are improved.
Is that to say that hospitals are depressing? I think like that's, to me, that feels immediately like a very effective practical shift to make a surgical recovery room look like a forest.
Yeah.
Or at least have a window.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the hospitals some of the hospitals in Brooklyn that I used to see from the subway were so scary.
Absolutely. They're sterile intentionally, right? They're devoid of nature.
To keep it clean, I guess. The idea
right?
is to keep it tidy, but boy, to wake up from a major operation to recover with sunlight access, as opposed to not. Schools too.
Schools for sure. And so these ideas of like greening the clinic, bringing in greenery, green spaces, just like we walked out there, it's just so lovely to have that median of plants in your courtyard. It's so deeply therapeutic, and we don't necessarily register, but we've evolved in nature, in forests, in Africa for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. And these conditions in which we're living are not unlike cages for animals, even though they might be like, we might have granite countertops or stainless steel appliances, but they are four-walled, boxed angles that don't even exist in nature. there's some really interesting psychology of folks that, like, in Western world can be fooled by an optical illusion, versus, when they take the same picture to Tanzania and show it to folks who live there, they're not fooled by the optical illusion. What it is a line with 2 arrows on either side of the line facing, with the point at each end of the arrow flaring out versus flipped, where the points at the end of each arrow and the arrows come in, right? We see one line as longer with the extensions and the other shorter, but it's because our brain has adapted to living in corners, and we extrapolate. They see the line as the same length in Tanzania, and that's because they are accustomed to the natural contours of life, of nature. And so that's just simply to say that brains wire completely differently. And I think that we're in error. We are not actually seeing reality as it is because of our constructs. And, another massive takeaway from this weekend to me was really that as scientists, as academicians, as medical providers, and generally otherwise smarty pants, we need to humble ourselves and open up the definition of science to include ways of knowing that are indigenous, that are maybe just not clearly understood yet. And we've labeled as superstitious or,
primitive.
Exactly. Because folks are in tune. They're in tune with the cycles of life and nature. And I mean, take some poetic liberty here, but like speak the language of the plants or the animals, and really are in relationship and in balance with the natural world, I would just give a shout out to Braiding Sweetgrass, the best book I might have ever read in my life, and just highly recommend Robin Wall Kilmer's book, if you haven't read it yet, how beautifully she describes from an indigenous Potawatomi perspective about the fabric of even the language and being in relationship to the land around us and all that means for us. There was a study, just to give a quantifiable, and I actually met the person who helped work on this concept of nature attention restoration theory. That nature helps improve our attention because it allows for soft fascination. This is a great new phrase that I love. Wow. Soft fascination allows our cognition to rest. And when we gaze out over, a lawn, a landscape, a vista, we're softly fascinated, and allows us to rest, in contrast to hard fascination, like, say, a video game or even an engaging movie, right? We're fascinated. We can't look away. We're evolved to develop that skill for our survival, of course. But we're also not developed to have that engaged at all times when with a phone in our pocket. I feel like I was onto another thought and forgot what I was going. Went on a tangent, but attention restoration theory. Yeah, I remember. This group I don't know if it was them directly, but it along these lines, some of the other one of the quantifiable things in nature was a study that they did in a housing project in Chicago. This group did. And there were, did I tell you this last time?
Well, there's no other last time officially on the record, because this is the first conversation that we'll actually share outside of the conversations you and I have had in the past, fortunately. But yeah, this will be our first shared conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there were two identical 10-story, there were 10 identical 16-story buildings in Chicago. All of them initially had green spaces around them. After wear and tear and not much money for maintenance, about half of them got their lawns paved over and half of them didn't. And so they did this social experiment and interviewed the people in these different housing projects. And those who had greenery had more, had better social functioning. They knew their neighbors by name. They could ask them to take care of their kids in case of an emergency. They were far more well connected, and the homes without green had social breakdown. They were less able to productively talk things through and resolve problems. And so they saw this corroborated with police records, and this sort of went hand in hand with this study they did at the University of Pennsylvania, and I think Columbia, where they selected kind of random lots in the city to do cleaning and greening. And when they cleaned and greened these lots, gun violence lowered by 9.1%. And I just think this is amazing, that nature has that effect.
Yeah.
Kindness and empathy and compassion amongst us.
Yeah. Yeah. You've set up nicely for us how the ecological ecosystem consideration and the concerted effort to have it be a part of the discussion around contemporary medicine and psychedelic medicine specifically, I guess, if you're going to be studying psychedelic medicine, that the ecological consideration needs to be a primary and prominent component of that curriculum or that thought space, and that it's well suited for you because of the values that you hold and the connections you have. Mm-hmm. So for our audience, this is the first time that we're discussing publicly, how does one become a psychedelic psychiatrist, and what does that mean?
Well, I don't know that it's clearly defined yet. I've actually never heard anyone else use that term, so I'm kind of using that for...
We talk about the term psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy.
Yes.
But psychiatry and psychedelics, I don't hear those terms used together as much. And obviously, you can only speak to your experience, but please do.
Well, I think that's a really important point, because I believe that in the vast 90+%, I mean, maybe 80, but the vast majority of cases that psychedelics should be used with some kind of therapeutic support. This goes into, some of the challenges that just happened with the FDA's approval of MDMA, because it's MDMA assisted therapy, and the FDA is not set up to evaluate the therapy portion of it, right?
The consideration for the approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rejection.
Right. Yeah.
The medicine. And there were many other problems too that not talking about that at this moment, but, psychiatry is a pretty well-established track within medicine, and because psychedelics are being used in a medicalization kind of framework in order to promote their legality, there's a very strategic way to approach legalizing psychedelics. Because they do have demonstrable benefits. Not to say they're not without problems, but they have impactful benefits for PTSD in particular. And so, right now with the legality of psychedelics, the only legal, psychedelic, if you want to call it that, it's technically a dissociative anesthetic, but it's ketamine. And anyone who has a medical license can use ketamine, and they do. And, so that's not required to be a psychiatrist in order to use ketamine by any stretch. It's an anesthesiology drug primarily. But we have begun to use that initially off-label. Now it's on-label for treatment-resistant depression with Spravato.
It's a part of your practice as a psychiatrist?
It is, yeah.
Something you prescribe? Something you administer? Did you know you wanted to be a psychiatrist when you were a little girl?
No, I didn't.
But you had
I think I wanted to be a wisdom keeper. I wanted to be a healer. I wanted to be, I don't know if a healer is right. I wanted to help facilitate people's healing. I wanted to assist folks on that journey. I was always interested in consciousness and mysticism and the bigger picture questions about our, place in the cosmos. And
did you have family role models?
I did. I had a mom who was very psychic and did all kind of tricky little things. And would visit me after she passed away. I was 9 years old, and make herself very clearly known with a sense that I can only really describe as most close to a sense of smell. It was just a knowing, like a familiarity, when you smell somebody's fragrance that is like immediately recognizable. It was that clear of a sense of her being around. And so I knew there was something across the veil. And, I have indigenous Native American lineage. And although I've been fairly largely, unfortunately, disconnected from my own heritage in that sense, there were still traces of it that would come through. And my grandmother would, help me understand. And at one point saw me like burning up a Mother's Day card that I was required to make in school because it was Mother's Day. And that's the only way I knew to get it to her was up, because I had been taught she was in heaven, and I knew smoke goes up. So I'm burning the card, and my dad's freaking out, she's delinquent, she's burning up stuff. And my grandma said, no, baby, she's fine. She's sending the smoke signals, to her mother. She knows what she's doing. So whether these kinds of things have trickled down, or intuition, or just a fascination with the realms that I felt exist but I could not see, was fascinated in areas of what I would think of now as, I'm trying to look for another term than shamanism, because I don't care for that term. It's not appropriate here, but mysticism maybe, spirituality, healing on levels that are deeper than what psychiatry has been traditionally working on. But that's where I thought I would get by becoming a psychiatrist. But I finished with more questions than answers, and did a lot of searching into what other cultures believed and how other systems see the mind, body, spirit, and psychedelics. I mean, I've also always been interested in them. I was introduced at a pretty early age.
To which psychedelic?
Psilocybin and LSD. And that was in a place where those were not illegal. So I'll just give that disclosure.
Okay.
But yeah, they were pretty instrumental in feeling that it really validated what I suspected that I was experiencing. That, oh yeah, these are just layers that are one step beyond our everyday, ordinary state of consciousness access. So they felt familiar and comfortable.
You're the type of psychiatrist that I would entrust my troubles to.
I think you said entrust, not wouldn't trust.
That I would entrust my troubles to.
Thank you.
Because I feel comfortable around you, and I feel like that's a big part of people getting mental health help and health help. And you've talked to me before about the difficulty that people have in finding psychotherapists, psychiatrists who understand where they're coming from due to race, due to socioeconomic factors, due to family, whatever your character defining or social representative defining attributes are. What's moving and changing in that world? What have you seen developing in that space? Because we've talked about frustrations that you've had before and challenges that you face. And I know that it's something that comes up often when we talk about getting the kind of care that can really move the needle for people. And I think relatability and can you speak to that for us?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for that big compliment. That's
I just think, I'm happy to share that, but also like, I would want to entrust that kind of work to somebody who I feel like values ineffable things that matter to me as well.
I think that's so important, and I think that it's a real disservice that the field of psychiatry is frankly not bold enough to embrace what they may be shunned for. I think science is limiting what they're capable of doing and understanding and respecting, and voices that they're not getting to hear from, and we're losing a lot because of that. Fear around not mentioning the ineffable or not speaking of the spiritual. I think it's a real loss or a shame, and it's a lot to do with semantics, because we, this processes that we're going through, you could call them magic, you could call them consciousness, you could just call them life, you could call them spirit, but we are closing our minds to that. So I think it's particularly important for psychiatrists and mental health care providers. I'm going to pull back, but there's a bit of a medical establishment that has a very fraternity kind of a vibe to it, and just rooted in Cartesian kind of science, and it's limiting and it's alienating. And I think people come with their rich breadth of experience, and not all of it is effable or measurable, and they need to be heard there. I think that different cultures experience that different ways. And so when you come in making cultural references or speaking about how you've had visits from ancestors in dreams, or the way that one grieves or mourns someone who's passed, needs to be understood. At least needs to be
empathized with.
Yeah, respected, tolerated, invited into the room. Because it's, if you have a mismatch there, you can be seriously pathologized. Labeled as psychotic, put on medications that are inappropriate, hospitalized against your will, right? These could become human rights violations because of, a cultural barrier, language barrier, internal bias against a group you don't understand. And so one of the things you were asking about, like, where is this going in the field? I'm really hopeful that this is going more into community-based and group therapy work, because that has the protection of the other members of the group and not just one person in a position of power, viewing you through their own limited lens. And quite frankly, you know, we look at like 2% of psychiatrists are Black.
In the United States?
Yeah.
Canada as well?
Probably less, because there's just no Black folk there.
Yeah.
Fewer Black people there. But yeah, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And then, you know, when rates of disparity and systemic oppression, et cetera, I mean, it's quite miraculous that Black people have the same rough, you know, in many particular illnesses, the same rates as folks who are not marginalized, who do walk through the world with privilege. It just speaks to our resilience. But in a lot of ways, we do have more severe mental health issues and outcomes, and less support, and, you know, more stigma and less access. And just, anyway, I think that the inherent mismatch is problematic. And when when you do have goodness of fit, when you do have somebody that understands you and you feel you can trust and open up to and process with, and that you are in an emotionally, psychologically safe place to do so, it's really important, particularly with psychedelics, because there's this additional layer of vulnerability that if inside those settings someone is committing microaggressions or frank macroaggressions, you know, against you, and or just an ignorant misunderstanding or a lack of caring about you and your experience.
Yeah, like you said early on too, it's a language. Speaking the language is so essential for this to work. And so I'm thinking that you probably have a modality of choice in mind that you would like to be able to work with on a regular basis, or you would like to be able to see being worked with more on a regular basis, given that there's a greater understanding of how to work with that modality most effectively. What would that be?
I really think community-oriented, place-based, like
Container created?
Yeah, like community-informed care that is ecologically influenced. You know, I think that healing in nature, taking it outside of the clinic, reconnecting with that essential piece of who we are and what we're a part of, it really creates a sense of belonging. And that, I think, is at the core of our epidemic of loneliness and mental health crisis and, you know, addiction, opiate addiction epidemic, and, you know, so many of the other issues that are downstream from basically a sense of isolation and lack of belonging. So I see that, you know, not just belonging to a group of people, but belonging to our planet and a part of our relationships and identity, you know, our relationships of belonging and support. And that's not a unidirectional, like, what can we get from nature? Oh, let's go out into nature and see what we can get because the health benefits are amazing. But a reciprocal giving and receiving, and ideally, like, looking into ecological restoration or salvation because we're at that point now. And this is where I think, you know, keep plugging psychedelics, but there's a special kind of expedited connectedness with those molecules and those, and I don't mean to say that in an isolative way, just that it's just some active ingredient, like one molecule. So if we're talking about psilocybin, I actually am referring to the whole mushroom ideally, which is not being studied in clinical trials for the most part. I think there's 2 going on right now with whole mushrooms, but minor detail. Well, it's not minor, but it's a detail. I think that I was going to share earlier, but skipped it. I'll circle back to, they did a study where they took people and gave them a 3-day holiday, either in a nice urban environment or out in a beautiful, nature dense place. And before they went, they drew their blood and saw their baseline of natural killer cells. After the 3-day weekend in the city, no change in natural killer cells. After the 3-day weekend in the forest, there was a 50% increase in the number of natural killer cells.
What's a natural killer cell?
It's like your immune system.
I've
it
never
kills
heard
invaders.
That before. Ooh, a natural killer cell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 50% increase in those who took 3 days in nature as opposed to 3 days in the city.
Yeah, and then a month later, they redrew those results. They were still 25% above baseline in the nature group. So it's doing something measurable to our physiology. We need nature. And so I think that people that have been cut off and deprived for forced urbanization or various other reasons, or just marginalization, right? Just like look at folks who are differently abled and they're in a wheelchair and there's no ADA access in the city park, or they're not going out into the beach, or somebody who carries a marginal identity and they're unsafe going in the woods. I think about like trans folk and think about, women in general. There was a meme that went around not too long ago. I don't know if it was a meme, but something went viral where a question was asked. Would you rather run into, who would you rather run into in the woods, a bear or an unknown man? And people rather run into a bear. These women were answering, they'd rather run into a bear. And there were some pretty heartbreaking sort of secondary comments around that about, right? Like, the bear wouldn't enjoy mauling me. The bear wouldn't say that I asked for it. The bear would see me as human. So we have a culture of nature that needs to be addressed. I know the racist history of national parks, but even thinking about the woods, right? You say that, you just say that with tone of voice, and you know what I'm talking about, right? You're not going out into the woods, but it's a culture of extraction, first of all, but hunting and guns and fishing and big old gas guzzler monster trucks and like some of the nationalist idealism that is not welcoming to the majority. We got to fix that because we need nature. We are nature.
Be more tree.
Be more tree.
Stephanie, I hope that you do wind up coming down and at least spending more time in Los Angeles so we can spend more time together.
Totally.
And I appreciate your time, appreciate you coming on and sharing. We will share links to appropriate information that's available to share, and people can connect with you if they have further questions through those channels. But I always appreciate your time, and I'm grateful for your wisdom and your sharing.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you and hang out and chit chat. We always have great conversations. I really appreciate it. Thank you for giving me the space to share some of these ideas and your insightful questions.
Let's do it again soon.
Sure.